Um, what we're going to be doing today is some cropping in Photoshop. Now, with your current project, you're meant to be working in two Adobe programs. Firstly in Photoshop and then in Illustrator. So in Photoshop, you'll be editing photographs of architecture, removing backgrounds and any other superfluous detail. So you can emphasize the style of the design in Illustrator using typography. Okay, so let's begin. Now we always open a file, preferably through the file, open, then go to your folder where you've saved the downloaded images. You'll find 4 files, one on brutalism, one on deconstructivism with Gehry, the international style, and organic design. So I'm going to just show you how to do curves and straight crops. So let's start with brutalism maybe, and start with something that is relatively straightforward to crop. Let's go with this one here. Right, so we've opened our file in Photoshop, and we can now proceed to remove the background. Now there's a number of ways you can do this in Photoshop. One is with the wand tool, and you can play with what's known as tolerances up the top here, and the smaller the number, the fewer pixels differential picks up. The greater the number, the more differences between pixels, and therefore the greater the area. Which is fine if you've got a uniform color you're selecting, but when it's mottled like this, it's not really much any good. But you can do it progressively, of course, select sections at a time. The other way of making selections in Photoshop is using the lasso tool, and there's 3 ways of using it. There's the freehand, the first one, the polygon or the polygonal lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso. I'm not going to use that either. There are times that this is quite useful and very quick. I'm going to use the pen tool. The pen tool in conjunction with the selection tool together. So the default setting has the little black arrow showing. We want to use the white arrow. The white arrow does slight little differences by modifying the anchors, whereas the path selection tool just chooses the whole path. Now, the pen tool is very similar to making vectors in Illustrator, but they actually work a little differently here. And what we can do is we can actually export vectors from Photoshop into Illustrator. But today what we're going to be doing is using the path tool to help us select the background, then delete the background. Alrighty, now first things first. Whenever you open a JPEG, you'll have as a layer labeled background. Backgrounds are locked and there's not much we can do with them. So what you want to do is convert that into a layer. Double click and then accept this as a layer 0, and now it's quite changed. This is really important. If you don't do that, then there's no transparency later. What you'll have is a background deleted, the color of either these 2 colors that you may have in your palette. Now, let's begin. So zooming in, Control plus, zooming out, Control minus, Control plus, and if you press the space bar and left click and drag, you can actually move around nice and easily, and this is really important. So the space bar changes the pen tool into a little hand. I'm going to put it so we can see it. There you go. Okay, that's really important because you'll be able to move around while you close up into the detail. So let's begin. Let's begin on the very edge. Make a decision about where you're going to have this. You've already done this in your visual diary, so refer to your initial drawings we're on the pen tool, but the last selection we made was this white arrow. So what happens is when I hold down the control key, it will now shift from being a pen tool to a selection tool. Pen tool, selection tool, just by holding down the control key. So what that enables me to do is just to move the anchor point into position. That's better. And to move that anchor point into position. Now I can proceed. Spacebar, move along. Ooh, that's a bit out. I can put that back in. Now I could do all this at the very end when I finish all my drawing. I can fix this as well. And I can also use my cursor using the arrow, sorry. Now, let's begin again. Click on where we last finished and continue. And this time I'm going to be careful to go a little inside the actual architecture. And let's proceed. Moving along. I'm not, it's really important that you see that I'm not actually clicking and dragging. I'm clicking, then moving along to the next point, then clicking again. If I click and drag, what's going to happen is I'm going to be creating curves. I don't want curves, I want straight lines. We'll do curves in the next exercise when we crop the background out of a organic or deconstructivist design. So, moving along. Righto, now we can finish this off by simply going all the way around. If I just zoom out, that way you get a better picture of what's happening. And let's see. Let's go a bit smaller again. There we go. I'm going to click all the way around, around and around. And I need to finish it off. See how I've got a little square at the bottom of the pen tool? That means now I've completed the circuit and it's now a complete closed shape, a vector or a path. So step one's done. Now what I've got to do is I've got to go to paths, which is right next to the layers tab, and I have to select the third of these little circles, the broken one, the broken circle, which loads a path as a selection. What does that mean? It means it functions like a wand. So now we have made a selection and we can delete the background, and it's done. The background is deleted. Now there's a little bit there which I've kind of missed. But before we go any further, what I'd like to show you is how to check. Control D select turns off marching ants, and what we're going to do is just check for how accurately we've cropped around the edges. So we make a new layer, we bring that layer, sorry, I'm in parts, just ignore what I just did there, people. Let me just delete that. Now back to layers, make a new layer, drag the layer underneath layer 0, layer 1 underneath, get a bucket. The bucket is with a gradient tool, and whatever color you have on top will fill the background. So that looks all right. And there's little white streaks, but those little white streaks are actually a part of the architecture, so I'm going to leave that. But I've missed a little hole between the columns here, so I'll go back into that and get rid of that background. And I might just, let's see, so I don't lose the path that I just created. I want to save that. for future use. So I go click on it first and make selection stroke blah blah blah, save path, and save as path 1, so it's there, so I won't lose it. Now I want to make another path, so I'm going to go to here now, and I'm going to lining up with that, and right, so I've made a new path. Let me turn it on and make sure I'm in the correct layer, layer 0, and delete. Control deselect, and let's go back out. Control 0 gives you the maximum view. Okay, we can now proceed to the next stage. But before we save this document, I'd like you to dump that new layer. You don't need it. You'll be creating new backgrounds in Illustrator itself. So that was only to check how accurate we were. Look, I left a little bit in there as well, but you know, for the purposes of this exercise, I'm just going to leave it. So much for a rectilinear style using straight lines or straight vectors or paths. We'll do one now that requires you to use curves. So again, File, Open, and let's go say to Gary and choose, okay, I'll choose this one here, more of a detail of the Disney Concert Hall. Voila. Okay, so what we've got now is all these curves to deal with, and I've already decided in my rough sketch that I'm going to delete this background of here, which is also part of the building, but it kind of subdues the, if I included that straight line and not include this line in my cutout, and so let's begin. Right, so curves. Curves are a different proposition. So rather than clicking, moving the mouse, then clicking again, this time we need to click and just according to how severe or great the curve is, we need to move these little moustaches. You click and drag, and I'll do that. I need to zoom in. Control plus, space bar, and there we go. Click and drag. Now it gives me a curve on the other side as well, which I don't really want. I want that to be straight, so I just drag that in, and there we go. So let's continue. About there, and there's a curve. Click and drag. Hold the control key, and the control key will allow you to shift between tools. And there we go, that's pretty close. Zoom back out, and well, this wire is a bit of a bother, but you know, I'm just going to ignore it. It won't really show up in the scale we're going to be working later. So I've got to fix that bow. That's okay for now. See how it's really not following the contour of the building. That one is, because it's a straight line. There we go. Okay, so let's continue. And again, just as before, let's go all the way around and finish it off, meeting where we started. Now I'm going to go zoom in and I'm going to correct this little extra bow that's happening. So control changes back to the little white arrow, and I need just to be able to push back one side of that anchor. That looks not bad, and maybe move that in a little bit. Control 0. Okay, I forgot to actually turn this into a layer, so it's a locked background. So let's just double click on that, and now we can actually modify the background. We can delete all that stuff, including the building and the sky, or portion of that building, to make sure that we emphasize this interesting curve. Right, let's go to paths and turn on or load the selection. Once we've done that, back to layers, delete, and Control D turns off the marching ants, and add a new layer. Let's do a little check of how accurate we were. We can make little corrections if we weren't all that accurate. Oh, it's not bad. Oh, it's a little white streak there, and there's a little white streak there. So all I've got to do to correct that is go back, load my path again. There it is, and I can just play with that a little bit. There you go. I think that'll do it. Bit inside. It's always safer to go a little further in. And there was one somewhere else. Oh well, I don't remember where it was. Let's just turn this back on. Layers, Control 0, and make sure we are in layer 0, not this layer here. That's just our background color. And delete. And turn off the marching ants, Control D, and voila, we have fixed that little error. And it looks pretty okay to me. Good. I reckon we can do something with that. We can have text somehow be squeezed out between these two parts of the building. Right, let's save it again as a PSD. PSDs are native to Photoshop. And what they do is they, hang on, before we do that, let's dump layer 1, which we don't need that. File, save as PSD, which will retain the transparency of the background. Okay, good. We have now completed part 1 of the use of these Adobe tools, and all the remainder of the work will be done in Illustrator. This is just the initial editing, and now we can proceed to actually the inclusion of typography. There may be occasion for you to return to Photoshop if you wanted to, say for example, create some text in perspective, where you can actually squeeze things in and out. But we'll look at that a little later.